We've done Blanton's, we've done Weller Antique. Now it's time to talk about 5 easier to find alternatives to Stagg Bourbon. Stay tuned after the break and we'll talk about it. So Stagg is one of my favorite bourbons. If you've watched the channel for any amount of time, that is not news to you. I love Stagg. I like the Buffalo Trace profile in general. Call me a tater, call me whatever you want. I love the fruitiness mixed with leather oak balancing it out. I love them. I have a bunch of them. I think I'm up to 6 now. But I want to find, I think, more easily available alternatives. So we're going to talk about kind of what I view Stagg Bourbon as and then how I approach alternatives for that. And we're just going to kind of go from there. So most Staggs are between, I think the lowest I've seen recently, I think is 23C is like 125.7, something like that. So 125.7 to I think 132.2 is the highest it's been recently, which is 22A, which is this one, coincidentally. They generally are in that 128 to 130 range. And for the most part, I think they drink more like a 120. They're generally more approachable. They don't have a whole lot of lingering heat, especially when they've been open for a little bit of time. You can argue about the neck pour or letting the bottle open up, whatever you want to call it. I firmly believe in that, and I think especially the heat of ethanol that you get when you first open a bottle degrades after time. Staggs, for me, tend to get smoother. They tend to get a little bit more to it than just the heat over time. So I think they drink more like 120 to 125 range. So you'll see a little bit of a theme in the whiskeys that I'm suggesting as alternatives to this being more in that range. When I want an alternative to it, I want something that is fruity, but then also has some sweetness to it, not necessarily fruit sweetness. I think the grape note I generally get in Buffalo Trace sometimes leans more towards like a dry wine than like a grape juice. I would rather have some fruity notes, some sweetness, and I want something to balance that out. Some oak, some leather, some tobacco, some molasses, something like that to bring all of that kind of into perspective. It's like having a little bit of salt with caramel or cleansing your palate with dark chocolate. It's bringing kind of a gravity to it. And that's what I like. That's what I like about Staggs. They generally tend to be that. And it's not just a Buffalo Trace thing for me. I've had tons of bourbons, and generally the ones that I like follow that balanced approach. So without any further ado, we're going to talk about the first one. Holladay Rickhouse Proof. This is the bourbon. It is the rye bourbon. They do have a soft red wheat also, which I just recently picked up. So stay tuned for that being on First Impressions soon. I did a First Impressions of this, and I like it. I think it's got a lot of those Stagg-esque flavors. Sweet and has some oak and some leather to it behind that. It is a little bit compressed of a palate, and I think that's kind of across all Holladay products. They don't have a lot of deep, very distinct flavors. Everything just kind of rolls into itself. Some people like that. I prefer something where I can spend a little bit of time with it, have, you know, some fruit notes, some leather notes, some oak notes, distinct notes that are very, very poppy. They're like, oh man, that's raspberry. Oh man, that's creme brulee. Oh, that's marshmallow. That tends to be what I like. But I think for a lot of people who like Stagg Bourbon, this is going to be a good alternative. And I mean, I think it's $65, or at least it should be. I think that's around MSRP. So it is what Stagg should be, not necessarily what people are selling Stagg at. It's a good bourbon. It's about 120 proof. This is 2023's edition, or one of 2023's editions. So we'll see. The proof will, I'm sure, vary by batch, so maybe you'll get some higher ones that are closer to touching a Stagg. This drinks proof-wise appropriately to Stagg, because I think Stagg drinks under, this drinks maybe a little bit above, and then they have very similar mouthfeels, very not oily, but thick in coating. That is my first alternative. I think it's going to be a good one, and it's not going to break the bank. I know I talk about this bourbon all the time, but this is my second one. Blue Note, I have cooled on it a little bit, especially since I think the unicorn barrels from the destroyed Rickhouse are now gone. so I think they're going down in quality a little bit, but I still love everything coming from Green River. These are Green River sourced, if you didn't know. Green River Full Proof has been great. Green River has been putting out some great picks. They're now owned by Bardstown Bourbon Company, but these are great. They're generally like 40, 45 bucks. They're not going to give you the quality of experience from a Stagg, but they're going to give you the basics of a Stagg profile at a much cheaper price. I think they have good grape notes, good leather notes, maybe a little bit of a youthfulness is the generally the only thing that I find these to have that I don't care for. But Blue Note, I think, is a great alternative to Stagg at a cheaper price and at a more reasonable findability. So that's one to try. The next one is actually going to shock people because I have said for a long time that I don't think this is a competitor to Stagg. I don't think it's an alternative. But this specific batch has changed my mind a little bit. And that is Elijah Craig Barrel Proof. This is specifically B524. It is 130.6 proof, and it has actual fruit flavor, which is something that I generally am missing out of Elijah Craig products. And this has a spiky palate. I like the peaks and valleys of it. I think it's very distinctly like a little bit of raspberry, a little bit of nuttiness. It has kind of like a peanut butter and jelly thing going on to me. And then it has some marshmallow, some oak. And I think this is one of the better ones. This is not quite what C923 was. I don't think this is gonna be top 5 of the year for me, but I think it could be top 10, and I think it's very good. So this one is 130.6 proof, so it's right in that Stagg proof point. I think this one's very good, and it's available for 80 bucks, so it is a very close competitor in price. I think it's worth a pickup. I think if you are craving Stagg, this is going to be something that is going to scratch that itch in a really similar way. And it's pretty readily available. I think that it's still sitting on shelves places. It's not gotten the hype that C923 had, being 13 years old and 133 proof. It's close to C923. Very interesting, very good. Not other batches, but just specifically this one. Number 4, we're getting closer. I kind of started further away and worked my way closer to what I think Stagg is. Old Forester single barrels. So this is a specifically Saubles pick from Nick at Saubles Markets in Whiteford, Maryland. This one is a lot of fruit notes. I get generally a lot of cherry off of Old Forester. It has a little bit of medicinal. Like Old Forester can have a little bit of that medicinal. The distinct cherry with the ethanol of bourbon kind of sometimes gives a medicinal note, and this has very minimal amounts of that. But it's 128 proof. They generally tend to be between 125 and I think the highest I've seen is like 132, something like that. That is the highest I think I've seen is 132. So it is roughly a Stagg amount. These are younger, but they are in heat-cycled warehouses, so they tend to mature a little bit quicker. The price is generally between 80 and 120. I will buy most of the $80 to $100 ones on site. 100 to 120, I'm thinking about it. And anything above 120, I'm probably passing. These are close. I think they're very good. I think they're very competitive. I think some of these could actually beat Stagg in a blind for me. Depends on the day. It depends on how I'm feeling. But I think there are some really good picks out there. I had a really good one from Bourbon and Burns for Gentleman and Whiskey, the tasting group's birthday a couple years ago, and that was phenomenal. I think it was 132 proof. That one's fantastic. This one's fantastic. There are great ones out there, and I think they're well worth the purchase at under $100. So, there we go. The last one. The one that I think is now getting to be my go-to alternative to Stagg, and I talked about it in a video with Brad from the 717 Bourbon Society. We kind of were tasting these whiskeys, and I distinctly said, this specific batch to me is close to Stagg. Now, the thing about it is they have changed master distillers, and I think the new master distiller has a different profile that she is trying to hit, and I think that's what I'm liking more towards Stagg. Let's just talk about what it is instead of talking around it. It is Woodford Reserve Batch Proof. Now, Elizabeth McCall took over for Chris Morris at Old Forester / Woodford Reserve. If they share a master distiller because they're basically the same distillery under the Brown-Forman umbrella. Batch Proof is, I think, the closest thing to Stagg. It's got a lot of cherry. It's got some kind of orangey notes, which is something that I get out of Stagg sometimes. This one's 124.7, and I think it drinks above its proof, so I think it drinks closer to Stagg. And I think it gives a very close alternative flavor because it's got really bold, really big flavors, and it's very, very good in my opinion. I liked this one, I think, the most out of the three that we tried in that video. They were all very good, but I generally tend to like higher proof more. There was a 128.3 that we tried, but I still think I like this one the best. The problem being that Woodford Reserve Batch Proof is $150-ish. Now, I would say, willing to pay $150 for a Stagg batch that I like. So to me, that's a pretty even keel trade. So the price for this doesn't really faze me, but I can see where it would faze some people. But this is the top end of Woodford Reserve's offerings, and I think it's well worth it, especially if you like either Woodford Reserve or Stagg. I think these are great, and I like the direction that they're going under Elizabeth McCall. I have a bottle of this year's that I need to open and try, so we'll get to that at some point in the near future. But this, I think, is the closest to Stagg that I've come in a decently readily available bottle. Some places it might not be available, but it's sitting on shelves in Pennsylvania. I think people get sticker shock at the price and don't realize how good it actually is. So that is my list of 5 alternatives to Stagg. I would love to hear what you guys think. If you have bourbon that you think is close in flavor to Stagg and is a good alternative, drop it in the comments, because people don't always like my lists, but they'll check out the comments to see what other people have said. I'm very open to criticism. I love to hear what the community says, so please drop your 5, drop your 1, your 2, your 3, whatever. What you think is close in flavor profile to Stagg, or just a good alternative. Stay tuned, we've got some stuff coming up. We're gonna start back to doing live streams here soon, probably Friday nights. We're gonna do a State of the Industry, and then if I can get it together, we're gonna do another fantasy whiskey draft like we did last year. That was a ton of fun. Got some guys around who know whiskey, and we did a mock draft, and it was super fun. Check out those videos. Check out our shorts on Mondays and Fridays. Mondays are Do I Like This? Fridays are First Impressions. These full lengths drop on Wednesdays. If you like this content, check out our other videos. Please like and comment on this video and subscribe if you haven't already. It helps us with engagement. It helps us a ton, and we hope you'll join us in drinking like a gentleman. Cheers. This one isn't opened, but the one that we used in that video was Brad's, so I have had it.